This is one of the strongest lightning monk builds you can make in Path of Exile 2. This build is a continuation of my monk build series, and I know many of you are eager to see what's changed for Cruel difficulty and Endgame. I have two early game versions of this build already on the channel, so if you want to know how to progress to this Endgame lightning build, I would watch those videos first, since they'll make you very powerful for Acts 1 to 3. For this Endgame version, lightning still plays an important role, but in order to maximize the damage and AoE potential of the build, you'll be adding some ice skills as well. When you complete Act 3 and enter New Game Plus Cruel difficulty, the enemies become way stronger, and rare enemies may have more resistances to elements such as lightning, ice, or fire. This is why it's really in your best interest to include ice into this lightning build just so you're not limited in those engagements. The good news is, lightning and ice is a very powerful combo which will allow you to debuff enemies, freeze them instantly, and cause massive explosions that will shatter all frozen enemies around you, causing a chain reaction. For endgame, attack speed and mob control is crucial. This build has high damage, incredible mob control capabilities, and capped resistances for lightning, ice, and fire, increasing your survivability drastically. I'm going to show you guys exactly what you need to do if you want a fast time to kill and proper defense so you can complete your maps and level up quickly. We'll go over the best skill gems, support gems, gear modifiers, and we'll take an extensive look at the passive skill tree as well. The skill gems on this build are Unbound Avatar, Herald of Thunder, Ghost Dance, Shattering Palm, Falling Thunder, Tempest Spell, Combat Frenzy, Charged Staff, Ice Strike, and Herald of Ice. Unbound Avatar is a skill from the Invoker Ascendancy. When you deal elemental damage to enemies, you'll reach up to 100 stacks with this skill. At 100 stacks, you can activate the skill and become unbound for a short period of time. When you're unbound, you'll deal 40% more elemental damage, 40% more elemental buildup on enemies, and 80% chance to inflict status effects. This skill is very useful when you're getting rushed by mobs, or if you're trying to kill bosses quickly. It gives you a massive burst damage buff that should be timed properly if you want to get the most out of it. Herald of Thunder is a spirit skill that activates whenever you kill a shocked enemy. Upon killing a shocked enemy, lightning bolts will release from the sky and attack all enemies in the surrounding area, allowing you to clear mobs easily. This skill will also help you generate energy charges quicker with Combat Frenzy and Resonance. Ghost Dance is another spirit skill I added recently to the build, and it was a nice addition for extra survivability. This skill gem periodically gains Ghost Shrouds. If you are hit while you have a Ghost Shroud, it is immediately consumed to recover energy shield based on your evasion. The higher your evasion rating, the more energy shield you'll receive when hit. Shattering Palm is a must-have skill if you want to freeze enemies quickly. This skill lets you dash forward towards enemies and attack them with an unarmed strike, which manifests a wave of cold, coating all nearby enemies with shards of ice. Doing so will make each enemy more prone to freeze and will cause them to explode when you attack them, thanks to the Herald of Ice buff, which we'll go over in just a minute here. This skill should be the first skill you use when you engage a mob. Your goal should be to mark them with Shattering Palm and then initiate Ice Strike to make all enemies nearby explode. You can chain this attack from mob to mob, making it the deadliest combo on the build. Falling Thunder is one of the best lightning abilities for the monk. It consumes energy charges to unleash a massive AoE lightning strike in front of your character that has a wider radius, more damage, and will travel further depending on how many energy charges you consume with it. This means that Falling Thunder is best utilized when you have max energy charges stacked, if you want the most amount of damage possible, that is. This skill is incredible for clearing mobs instantly, but requires an open area if you want to actually hit all of your targets, which is really the only downside of the skill. Tempest Spell also carried over to this build from the previous one, and that's because it's one of the best monk skills in the game and will pretty much fit into any build you create. This skill drops a resonating bell on the ground that deals AoE damage when you strike it. It also spreads elemental attacks, which means you can strike the bell with Shattering Palm, mark all enemies, and shatter them immediately after. It also applies quick stun buildup, which can be incredibly useful during boss fights. Combat Frenzy is a very important skill for this build. If you remember from my previous build, we were using Killing Palm and Siphoning Strike to generate energy charges in the build, so we could then buff Falling Thunder and use Charged Staff. For this build, you don't need to manually stack energy charges anymore, since you'll be effortlessly stacking them while you're killing enemies. This is made possible thanks to the Combat Frenzy Spirit skill, which grants you frenzy charges every time you freeze or shock enemies, and the Resonance passive skill, which alters the Combat Frenzy skill to give you energy charges instead of frenzy charges. This means all you have to do is apply status effects, and you'll always have energy charges available to activate with Falling Thunder or Charged Staff. Charged Staff consumes energy charges, so you can infuse your quarterstaff with lightning and shoot lightning projectiles with all of your skills, which is incredible since it turns all of your melee skills into range skills. For each energy charge you consume, your damage will increase. If you want to destroy bosses, for example, you would drop your Tempest spell, activate Unbound Avatar to buff your elemental damage and buildup, and then consume your energy charges to activate your Charged Staff. You'll see just how quickly you can melt a boss's health bar and clear mobs. Ice Strike is your main attack on this build. It performs a 3-hit combo with your staff and will also apply freeze buildup over time. Now, you can also use Tempest Flurry if you enjoy that skill, but Ice Strike is great because it dashes towards enemies that are highlighted, which lets you traverse the map quickly by dashing from mob to mob, ensuring your attacks will always connect. When you factor in Charged Staff and the Unbound Avatar skill, Ice Strike will turn into a killing machine. Herald of Ice is the last spirit skill on this build, and it's the main contributor to all the explosions that you're seeing on screen. With this skill, every time you shatter an enemy, it causes an icy explosion that deals attack damage to all surrounding enemies. This build is very straightforward. You'll shock enemies with your lightning skills like Charged Staff and Falling Thunder, and you'll freeze enemies with Shattering Palm and Ice Strike. When shocked enemies are killed, lightning bolts will strike from the sky, dealing damage to enemies thanks to Herald of Thunder, and when you freeze enemies, they'll shatter and destroy all enemies around within radius thanks to Herald of Ice. Your goal when you're running through each map is to stack energy charges, which is effortless thanks to Combat Frenzy and Resonance, allowing you to stack energy charges whenever you freeze or shock enemies. When charges are active, you can either activate Charged Staff to buff your damage, or you can save your charges for a max damage Falling Thunder strike. Unbound Avatar will give you massive bursts of damage once you activate the skill at max stacks, and should always be used when you're fighting against large mobs or difficult bosses. Tempest Spell is your main skill for boss fights since it has quick stun buildup, which will leave your enemies vulnerable. It's also a valuable tool for mobs since it spreads elemental attacks and provides AoE to your Ice Strike skill. And lastly, Ghost Dance is going to help you stay alive because every time you are hit while you have a Ghost Shroud, it is immediately consumed to recover energy shield based on your evasion. The higher your evasion rating, the more energy shield you'll receive. Now we can take a look at the support gems for each skill. For Unbound Avatar, you'll grab the Cold Mastery and Lightning Mastery. What this will do is add 1 level to every skill on your build that deals lightning or cold damage. Skills like Combat Frenzy, Tempest Spell, and Ghost Dance will not benefit from this support gem though. For Herald of Thunder, so far I have Elemental Focus and Inevitable Critical. Elemental Focus increases the damage of the lightning bolts that shoot from the sky by 25%, which occurs whenever you kill shocked enemies. Inevitable Critical increases the crit chance of the Herald of Thunder bolts by 25% each second up to 100%, and then resets once it critically hits an enemy. For Shattering Palm, I have Cold Exposure, which inflicts cold exposure for 8 seconds when you critically hit enemies with this skill, which will actually lower their cold resistance by 20%, making it even faster to freeze them. For Falling Thunder, I have 3 support gems. Perpetual Charge applies a 35% chance for you to not consume charges when you activate Falling Thunder, but still count it as consuming it, meaning you'll gain the extra damage and you won't lose any charges. Concentrated Effect adds 40% extra damage to Falling Thunder, and Lightning Infusion adds 25% extra lightning damage. This skill will deal a massive amount of damage when you consume it at full energy charges, and it has the potential to kill every single enemy around you. For Tempest Spell, I'm using Ruthless, which increases stun buildup by 500% for every 5th use of the skill, which can be very useful during boss fights, allowing you to stun bosses more often. Blind applies a 100% chance for you to blind enemies who are affected by Tempest Spell, which actually lowers their hit chance and decreases their evasion, which means more of your attacks will land. Discombobulate lets you daze enemies up to 100% of your physical damage dealt. Now, dazed enemies are stunned 50% faster. These 3 support gems will turn Tempest Spell into a boss destroyer skill. You'll see just how quickly you can delete bosses when Tempest Spell and all of your other buffs are active. For Combat Frenzy, I would recommend using Perfusion because it unlocks a 50% chance for you to receive an additional energy charge every time you freeze or shock enemies. Ice Strike is my main melee skill on the build, currently sitting at 13k base DPS before any buffs are activated. I have 4 support gems on this skill. Ice Bite increases cold damage by 35% every time you freeze enemies. Martial Tempo increases attack speed by 25%. Glaciation increases freeze buildup by 50%. And Primal Armament increases your elemental damage by 25%. For Charge Staff, I'm using Persistence, which increases skill duration, allowing you to use Charge Staff for an extended period of time. Conduction, which applies a 100% chance to shock enemies, allowing you to take advantage of Herald of Thunder more often. And Inspiration, which applies 40% less mana cost for Charge Staff. And lastly, for Herald of Ice, I'm using the Vitality support gem, which regenerates 1% of life per second while active, adding even more survivability to the build. And Concentrated Effect, which increases the explosion AoE radius by 40%, allowing you to explode more enemies around you. I have made a ton of progress to my passive skill tree, and all the choices I selected play a huge role in the effectiveness of the build. This monk build uses the Invoker Ascendancy, and if you have enough Ascendancy points, you should grab these 4 passives here. Chill Effect increases the magnitude of your chill by 15%. I Am the Blizzard gives you 10% extra cold damage, and you can create chilled ground on enemies you freeze. You can also increase your elemental damage by 15%, and then finally reach the Unbound Avatar passive. When you deal elemental damage to enemies, you'll reach up to 100 stacks with this skill. At 100 stacks, you can activate the skill and become unbound for a short period of time. When you're unbound, you deal 40% elemental damage, 40% elemental buildup, and 80% chance to inflict status effects. Step Like Mist increases movement speed by 4%, adds 15% mana regen rate, and 5 dexterity and intelligence, which are your 2 main stats, and should always be increased whenever possible. To the right here, you have Essence of the Mountain, which adds 5% extra cold damage, and increases freeze buildup by 20%. Moving back to the left here, it's important to note that Evasion and Energy Shield are your main priorities for the monk, especially if you're using the Ghost Dance Spirit skill. Flow Like Water increases attack speed by 8% and adds more dex and intelligence. You can also increase your crits here early by unlocking these nodes here, and Crashing Wave, which increases your damage by 36% if you dealt a crit within the last 8 seconds. Then you'll grab the nodes up until Moment of Truth, which will give you a nice boost to crit chance and crit hit damage. Just remember, crits are a little different in Path of Exile. I believe for every 100% crit chance you have, you'll actually gain 1% crit chance on your build. If we work our way to the top here, there's some really powerful passives that will increase the damage of your ice and lightning skills. Echoing Frost increases your elemental damage by 30% every time you chill enemies, and Echoing Thunder increases your elemental damage by 30% every time you shock enemies. With this build, you'll be chilling and shocking enemies simultaneously, which means you'll receive a 60% elemental damage buff consistently. Now, if we backtrack a little bit, there's some passives here that will help you increase your evasion and energy shield even further. Grabbing all these nodes will increase your evasion and shield, and when you reach E-Material, your evasion rating will increase by 50% every time your shield regens, which is all the time thanks to Ghost Dance. And you'll also gain 30% extra evasion whenever your energy shield is active. Then we'll move to the right and grab these nodes here and passives that are going to increase damage and attack speed. Tenfold Attacks increases your attack speed by 10%, and Killer Instinct gives you 30% increased attack damage when you're on full life, and 50% extra attack damage when on low life. As we continue up, you'll see one of the best passives on the build, which will help you stack energy charges effortlessly. Resonance allows you to gain power charges instead of frenzy charges. Now, if you remember from the skill gem breakdown, Combat Frenzy gives you frenzy charges every time you freeze or shock enemies. When Combat Frenzy and Resonance are on the build together, you'll gain energy charges every time you freeze or shock enemies instead, which is crucial. I would also grab all of the nodes and passives to the left of Resonance like True Strike, For the Jugular, and Deadly Force because they give you a massive boost to your crit chance and crit damage. From here, work your way up and grab these attack speed nodes leading up to Deep Trance, which adds 8% attack speed to your build and reduces the mana cost of your skills by 10%, which is nice. If we head back down and head towards the right, you can increase your evasion and energy shield even further by grabbing these nodes here up until Spectral Ward, which gives you +1 max energy shield per 12 evasion rating on your body armor. If we continue all the way around to the outside of the skill tree to the right here, you should also grab these blue nodes here that increase your crit damage every time you consume a power charge. and if you grab Overflowing Power, you can add 2 power charges to the build, increasing your max. Then you'll continue downward until you reach Throat Seeker, which decreases your crit chance by 20%, but increases your crit damage by 60%. And lastly, if you want to add a massive buff to your quarterstaff, you need to unlock all of these passives to the right here. One with the River will increase your defense, daze buildup, freeze buildup, and stun buildup by 30%. Whirling Assault will increase your attack speed and knock enemies back with your quarterstaff whenever you crit. Martial Artistry increases accuracy, crit damage by 25%, and dex by 25%. And one with the Storm counts your energy charge consumption as consuming 2, so you can actually get double the damage with just 1 charge. Gear is very important this time around, and we're going to go over each piece of gear, which modifiers you need for endgame, and we'll take a look at my character stats just to give you an idea of what you should be aiming for. My primary weapon is the Pandemonium Pile Advanced Barrier Quarterstaff with 20% quality and 182 to 304 physical damage. I have 2 runes socketed into this staff, giving me 20% increased physical attack damage and 20 life per enemy killed. For modifiers, I have 189% increased physical attack damage, plus 96 accuracy, 77% increased elemental damage, plus 18 dex, 4 life per enemy hit, and 19 mana per enemy killed. This quarterstaff is very powerful, and with enough exalted orbs, you can get a full set of gear with incredible modifiers at the official Path of Exile 2 trading website. All you have to do is log into your account, search for the items and modifiers you need, and then use exalted orbs to purchase them. For my helmet, I have the Wrathstar Expert Face Mask. My rune is giving me 20% extra evasion and energy shield, and for the modifiers, I have 19% increased evasion and shield, plus 60 max life, 20% increased crit chance, 32% fire resistance, and 27% cold resistance. Your main goal should be 75% elemental resistance for at least 3 of the 4 elements in the game. These include fire, ice, lightning, and chaos. Without resistances, your chances of surviving an endgame are very low. For my amulet, I have the Blight Beads Lunar Amulet, which gives me plus 27 shield, 46% increased evasion rating, 48 spirit, 12 strength, which I don't need, and 47% increased mana regeneration rate. The first ring I have here gives me plus 8% to all elemental resistances, 10 to 18 physical damage to attacks, 14% increased cold damage, plus 439 accuracy, 22 dex, 22% fire resistance, and 8% lightning resistance. My second ring is the Pandemonium Gold Ring with 13% increased rarity of items found, 23% cold damage, 14 intelligence, 6% fire resistance, and 22% lightning resistance. For the body armor, I'm using the Faux Wrap Advanced Feather Robe. My runes are giving me plus 25 max life and 12% cold resistance. For the modifiers, 48% increased energy shield, plus 94 max life, 44 spirit. Again, spirit is very important. I think if you want to have all 4 spirit skills active, you need at least 150 to 160 spirit on the build. 19 intelligence, 25% fire resistance, and 13% lightning resistance. For the gloves, the Vortex Nails Expert Gauze Wraps with a rune that gives me 15% mana regen rate, and for the modifiers, 97% increased evasion rate and shield, plus 81 max life, 33 dexterity, 25% cold resistance, and 25% lightning resistance. I have the Spirit Lash Fine Belt with plus 73 max mana, 12% increased mana recovery rate, 39% cold resistance, 34% lightning resistance, 8.3 life regen per second, and 12 to 18 thorns damage. The last piece of gear I have is the Viper Span Expert Laced Boots with 20% increased movement speed, plus 21 max life, plus 28 max mana, 38% fire resistance, and 49% reduced chill duration. For my character stats, I have 1,425 life, 770 energy shield, 627 mana, 152 spirit, 45% evasion, and 75% cap resistances for fire, ice, and lightning. 204 dex, 94 intelligence, and 39 strength. Dex is going to be your primary stat, and intelligence will be your secondary, which you will need to increase in order to meet minimum requirements for skills and gear. If you give this build a try, come back to the video and let me know if you liked it. I'm planning on dropping a complete version of this build for level 100. Let me know in the comments below which class you want me to focus on next. I was thinking either the Ranger or maybe even the Mercenary, but if you guys have any suggestions, I would love to hear it. If you enjoyed this video, a thumbs up would be greatly appreciated. It will help the channel grow and it will push the video to more people. And if you want to see more Path of Exile 2 guides coming soon, make sure you subscribe and turn on those bell notifications. Thanks for watching, everyone.